Let's get started then on replacing the naughty thermostat on Project TT.
Happiness is a vertical coolant gauge. Hello and welcome back to the Volks Wizard channel, and welcome to another episode of Project TT. In episode 1, I bought the car and limped it back home because there was a problem with the all-wheel drive and the ABS system, but in episode 2 they were fixed for just £24. In episode 3 I performed a long overdue oil change and replaced the faulty coolant temperature sensor, and in episode 4 I replaced the driver's side door lock for just £30. Well, today in episode 5 we're going to fix the thing that the coolant temperature sensor didn't fix, and that is basically a temperature gauge that doesn't do what it should do. And the only real fault that could cause that is a problem with the thermostat. This is a pretty common fault on cars of this age, and it means the car doesn't warm up fully, and that means it uses more fuel. It's really bad for the engine. It just makes it wear out more quickly. So if you've got a coolant temperature gauge that goes backwards while driving, then stay tuned because this is for you. But before we get started, let me just remind you guys how you can support the channel. As ever, the easiest way is simply to subscribe. Subscriptions have gone up quite a lot recently, so big thanks to subscribers new and old. But if you're one of the unsubscribed and you like what you see, then please do subscribe. Okay, let's start off then by looking at the parts, because all you really want to replace is the thermostat, which is faulty. But to do this, it's a good idea to replace other parts as well, otherwise you might find you need them anyway, so it's best just to get them in. So this is the thermostat, sits in the thermostat housing. It sits on the engine like that. The gearbox is just underneath it here. The coolant temperature sensor, which you would have seen in episode 3, is the left hole on this housing. I don't even know if you can do this in situ, to be honest. This is what you'd need to undo to get to the thermostat. So 3 screws. Then could you put it all back together securely in situ? I very much doubt it. And then you might find all this cracks when you try and put it back together or undo it, because it's had many heat cycles over the 20 years the original has probably been on the car. So you need to replace this housing, which is from Febi Bilstein, 105783 is the part number. It does come with the funny shaped gasket for the block, so that's good. The thermostat itself is from Febi Bilstein. It's 17898, but unfortunately it didn't come with the O-ring, which is a bit of a shame, but luckily I had it in stock, and that part number is N901368002 from VW or Audi. And you need the cover that goes on the thermostat as well. I got this actually new old stock off eBay. It's top brand. It's about 10 quid. I reckon you need 50 quid for all these parts. And this is an O-ring that you may forget, but it's quite important. So this is on the block like that, and running along the front of the block, probably to the water pump, I think, is the crack pipe, they call it, and that has an O-ring seal that goes on there. So that's the parts. Now we need to talk about the tools. So this is a picture taken from Irwin, the online manual. Pay €7. You can have an hour to download anything you want off there. It's money well spent. Just go to irwin.audi.com, or they've changed the name of it now to something like irwin.store.audi.com. So there are 3 screws there, 1, 2, I think that's the third one. They're 5mm, so you need 5mm Allen key, and you need various lengths potentially, so I've got a couple of those. Flat blade screwdriver, because you always need a flat blade screwdriver. Hose clamp pliers, because we're going to have to take hoses off the housing. Whether this will fit in there or not, it's a torque wrench, 10 Newton meters for the screws when you reassemble it all, whether it's these to this or this to the block. A magnet, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to drop something. If there's anything more we need as we go along, then I will show you. We do need a tray to collect the coolant, so bear that in mind, because there's going to be quite a lot of coolant loss, and because of that we've got some more coolant. Let's get started then on replacing the naughty thermostat on Project TT. Okay, so when you try and find the thermostat housing on the car, you might be somewhat put off because you can't really see it. As we found with the coolant temperature sensor, it can be a little bit fiddly, but the good news is we don't have a battery on this 3.2, so all this can come out, the airbox can come out. Actually, when you do that, then you get a really good view side on of the thermostat housing. So yeah, let's get stripping this area and hope that from that point onwards it will be quite straightforward. Now if you want to capture the old coolant, and I do because it's new from when I fitted the coolant temperature sensor, then there's a drain valve on the bottom hose of the radiator. So this is where it comes out from. To get to it, under tray off and push this side tray out of the way. And then it wasn't particularly stiff on this car, so I didn't really need a spanner to do that, to loosen it. So turn it like you would normally, anti-clockwise, to open something, and there she blows. It's not a fast flow, but it beats making a mess, that's for sure. Okay, we do need a 10mm socket, which I didn't mention earlier, to get the airbox base out, and we need a flat, cross blade screwdriver to undo the cover. Okay, while we're at it, I think we'll just have a quick look at the air filter condition, because I'm very aware that just doing an oil change like I did in a previous episode is possibly not enough on a car that's not been serviced at all for a few years. We'll deploy the hose clamp pliers at this point. It's been a while since I last used them. That's good. That should allow us to take the airbox lid off. Okay, it looks pretty standard, but this is the clean side, so what's it like under here? Not too bad. Perflux filter, could be worse. Okay, back onto the 10mm for the airbox base. Okay. That's the gasket then that goes onto the section that goes into the wing where the air intake is, so I'm not sure if that was on right before. Okay, we just need to get this battery. Well, it's actually got a fuse box in here, so it does serve a purpose, but we need to get this section off anyway. So to undo this battery frame, I'm removing a metal bracket from the chassis leg, which has got 4 bolts holding it on. It's easy to get to 3 of them, but the one that's sort of front outer here might be a bit tricky. We'll see how we get on. Yeah, the 4th one's awkward because the headlamp is in the way, but if you put a short socket on, you can actually get to it from inside the bracket once the other 3 bolts are removed to allow it to move around a bit. So you can see the thermostat housing now, which is there. The thermostat is actually in here, goes to the bottom hose on the rad, so it'd be pretty hard to undo these 3 screws in situ and put it all back together properly. So yeah, that's why you have to take it all apart. So that hose goes to the heater matrix, that's bottom hose from the thermostat, that's top hose of the radiator there, crack pipes in there somewhere, the coolant temperature sensor you can just about make out in there, it's green with a black plug on it. Hopefully we won't need to detach the intake manifold plunger, because we're going to be bringing the housing out this way, but we'll see how we get on. So yeah, need to undo these 5mm Allen key bolts. Okay, let's start detaching the hoses then. I have released the pressure from the coolant header tank and put the lid back on to minimise coolant loss, but we are going to lose a fair bit. So I've never done this job with some proper hose clamp pliers, so this should be a bit less frustrating and a bit less painful than using normal pliers, because as you can see they're quite springy, and when that catches your finger it can hurt. Let's see how easy they come off. This one looks quite easy. Yep. Not bad. they're quite big. Now we're going to go in the deeper 5mm. Short one. It's quite loose now. I think the only thing holding it on is the connection to the crack pipe, which runs around the front of the block. Hey. Okay, we've still got the coolant temperature sensor attached, so I think I'll just pop that out. It's got to come out anyway. There's the clip that we have seen only 2 weeks ago. And that should just come out. Just beware of the O-ring. So there we go, thermostat housing out. So now we need to swap over that blank piece there with its clip, the O-ring for the coolant temperature sensor, and the bolts that hold the thermostat cover onto the thermostat housing. Okay, so let's crack open these 5mm now to get the thermostat out. So there is the thermostat, and this notch is in line with this hole, so remember that. Also, the O-ring is, I would say, over this bit, not underneath it. Okay, so this is relatively straightforward then. So new thermostat in the housing, line it up with the notch and that hole right by the smaller flange, new O-ring over it, and then refit this cover, which can only go on one way, which will probably be the last way I try it. Yeah, it's looking that way. And then start off by hand winding in the 3 bolts. Okay, so that's snug by hand. Then we've got the torque wrench set to 10. There we go, clunk click every trip. Okay, I am happy with that. So 2 seals. One is for the flange to the head, like so. That should stay in, which is useful. And then one for the crack pipe. Actually, don't forget to carry over the blanking piece for the sensor hole. It does have an O-ring, which I haven't got, so that's another thing you should add to the list, but it looks in reasonably good condition, so that's okay. So that is the right hand one of the 2. Okay, that's in, and the clip. That's good. We've still got the O-ring for the sensor in there. That's relatively new, so we'll pop that in there so we don't forget it. Okay, so before refitting the new bits, we need to remove the old gasket, which is still there. Like so. And then we need to give the flange a bit of a clean. So you can see it's got a bit of corrosion on there, a bit of crusty coolant. Okay, that will do. Okay, so here is the famous crack pipe, and you can see the O-ring is sat on it. It is a little bit stubborn, but if you get a small flat blade underneath it, you can pop it out. Whatever you do, do not damage this pipe, because the other end of it goes to somewhere that's very difficult to access. Okay, that's off. Onto the new one. It's very hard to get O-rings like this off eBay. So this one came from Audi. So I put some coolant on it and slotted it on. We want it to go on smoothly when we put the new housing on, which we are ready to do now. Just remember, put that sensor in first. Okay, so let's get the new housing on then. First thing we need to do is fit the O-ring to the temperature sensor. Like so, there's a load of coolant on it, so it's going to go on really easily. And then now we need to get the sensor into the housing. Make sure it's all the way in, and then slot the clip in. Try not to drop it. Okay, with the sensor in, we now need to line up the housing with the crack pipe, making sure the gasket to the head doesn't fall out. Okay, that's on. Just take your time, be gentle, don't force it too hard. Make sure the gasket is in position on the housing to the head. Let's remember, we have to put this bracket on when we do these bolts, so that's interesting. So we'll do the one that doesn't need a bracket, which is down here. So let's rotate the housing into position. Now just be careful to start winding this in by hand, because you do not want to cross thread these. I think we're on. So get that hose clipped in first, which will then help us get that one in. Again, start by hand. You shouldn't be too far off because the other bolt's in, but just be careful. Okay, on to the third and final bolt. There is a clip that we need to reattach. So put that on with the hinge at the back and then just slide it on. It should lock into place automatically, beautiful. And then clip the hose in. Beautiful. Okay, time to torque up then. So once again, 10 Newton meters. Lovely. Lovely. Let's just see if we can get this into the deep one. Should be able to. Yep. Bingo. Good. Okay, now onto the hoses then. Try and reattach it where it was before. Okay. And now the bottom hose. Lovely, and that just leaves the heater matrix one. I can't believe how well this job is going. Beautiful, I can see exactly where that clip was and it's back there now. Now we've got to put the battery tray back in place. with all that done, it's now time to top up the coolant. We've lost quite a bit on this job, so there's a very high likelihood that it's going to burp out some air once you've topped it up. So if you fill it up to the max, don't be surprised if you come back and it's below the min. Just let it cool and then top it up again once the car's been through one heat cycle, and try and pour it in slowly, because then that means it's less likely to trap air. You can hear the air coming out, which is good. And with that done, it's now time for a test drive to see if all that time, expense and effort was worth it.
Okay, I'm going to be upfront with you guys. I drove the car with the new Febi Bilstein thermostat, and to be honest, it didn't seem to be warming up any quicker than with the original one. So it would get to 90 eventually, but it would go backwards, and that's the clue that there's something wrong. Going backwards from 90 isn't correct. So I've ordered another thermostat, paid a bit more this time for one from a company called Gates. They are an original supplier to Volkswagen. This is 90 degrees from this kettle, 70, 80, 90. It's cooled down a bit now, but you can see this one, the original one's really open there, and then this one from Gates is pretty much completely shut just there, so I can't get a screwdriver in there, but there's loads of room in there. So I'm hoping this will be right. If it's not, then it's not a problem with the thermostat. There's something else wrong with Project TT. So let's get it fitted and find out.
Let's try again then. So we've got the new Gates thermostat fitted. It's 3 degrees right now. So it's pretty cold, so it's not going to have any advantage in warming this car up, because it's actually colder than when I tested the Febi thermostat. I'll put the lights on. Hopefully you can see the gauge pretty easily. Now there is a cool little trick on the TT where you can use the climate control system to actually tell you loads of things, really, a bit like using VAGCOM. But what we're going to use it for is to look at the temperature signal from the sensor on the engine. So you press the recirculate and the up button together, and then with the left one, which is temperature, you can cycle up through a number of really nerdy things. But what we want is number 49, which will give us that temperature signal. The reason this is useful is because the gauge is a bit of a liar, really. It tends to show 90 from 80 to about 110, and that's for a very good reason. That's what a normal healthy engine will operate at, whether it's driving slowly, it'll be about 80, or whether it's working really hard in the summer. Beyond that, there's a problem, and that's when the gauge will move to the right. It should never move to the left with a healthy thermostat. Okay, so the needle now is getting up to 70, and that ties in with what we're getting from the sensor on the climate control, 70. So that's actually perfectly aligned. That's good, because again, you can have a correct signal from the switch, the sensor on the engine, that's misinterpreted by the faulty dashboard. Not unusual at all. It's climbing. We want it to keep on climbing now. What we don't want is to go back. I've got the heater on as well. 82. So I'm off the gas now, so there's more cooling air going in than there is heat being produced, but it's sticking at 82, so that's good. 83, that's good. 84. So even driving gently, it's still going up. That's good. Gauge is resolutely pointing upwards now, and that's good. So I don't think it's going to go below 80 again now. That's 85. There's no good reason. The thermostat's open, rad's doing its thing. Happiness is a vertical coolant gauge needle.
Now, before I put the Febi Bilstein thermostat in the bin, I just thought I'd compare it with the original. Now, bear in mind this is probably 20 years old and it's not working properly, but they should work when they're in good condition the same way. It should just be a different design, so slightly different like here, but it should be effectively perform identically to this one. The part number for this genuine part carries over to this Febi Bilstein one, but I don't know how they can perform identically when the spring is so weak on this Febi one. Bearing in mind that's brand new. This is the genuine part that's going in the bin because it's not working properly anyway. I can hardly move the centre bit there because the spring is so much beefier. Now it's important to remember thermostats aren't just like binary, they're not open or closed, they have like an in-between phase, and that in-between phase is very crucial to getting the car into the 80 zone so it keeps the gauge up to 90. I cannot see how that can perform the same as this, particularly in that in-between zone, and that explains why this is unfortunately fit for the bin.
Well, lesson learned then. It might be a cheap car, but it's definitely a false economy fitting cheap parts to it. I would fit genuine parts, but since Dieselgate, the cost of thermostats and other parts like that has at least doubled, probably tripled when you buy them from the main dealer, and therefore I do my utmost to avoid buying parts from there. But the mistake I made here is that with a part as critical and as nuanced in its performance of the thermostat, I didn't buy one from an original equipment supplier originally. So Febi don't supply parts to the manufacturers when they make the cars, but Gates do. Although the Gates one wasn't without problems, stamped inside it, very hard to read, it said 180 degrees Fahrenheit and 82 degrees centigrade. Yeah, it should have been 80 degrees centigrade. When I brought this up with the supplier, they contacted their supplier and they reckoned they'd been put in the box in the factory incorrectly because somebody has read, I'm assuming, read the 180, the 80 bit of 180 and thought it was an 80 degrees centigrade stat. It's just 2 and a bit degrees difference, which shouldn't be a problem for this car in the UK, assuming the fans work. And I don't think I've actually heard them running yet because it's just been too cold and the aircon doesn't work. That's another thing for a later video, probably not too distant now, seeing as we're coming towards the middle of February. As ever guys, thanks for watching this Project TT video. Keep subscribing, keep commenting, and I'll see you for another one very soon, which should be the repair of the window regulator.